Why don't we lead into the next section by talking about briefly our experience seeing Xylouris White.
Yes.
That was about 2 weeks ago.
Yes. So
in New Haven.
Yeah. I think it was April 5th was the date.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sounds about right. I think it was a Wednesday night. Mm-hmm. Myself, Jeff, Alex, my wife Jade, went to go see Xylouris White at Cafe 9 in New Haven. They just wrapped up a sort of a small U.S. tour promoting the new album, The Forest in Me. And we went to go see them, and it was mind-blowing for me, I can say, because I play the Cretan lute, as regular listeners of this podcast know, and I think that George Xylouris is an innovator and somebody who pushes the envelope of what's possible in the sort of Cretan music tradition and conversation. His father, Psarandonis, I mean, we've talked about this before on the podcast, but for those who don't know, Psarandonis is a famous Cretan lira player, which is a bowed, sort of lapped top instrument. And he was somebody who kind of took the music and started pushing it a little bit further out, and then his son, George Xylouris, who's a lute player, kind of got on that and sort of pushed it out even further, and then started bringing the lute into this kind of band sort of a setting, playing contemporary Cretan music, and that's what this performance was, and I thought it was great. What did you think, Jeff?
I really enjoyed it. Also joined by his drummer, Jim White, who is an Australian drummer, plays the band The Dirty Three, based in Australia. I like the fact that the evening there was a combination of their traditional songs with full vocals. I think George is an excellent singer. Like, literally, top 5 singers I've ever seen in my life, because it's a small room. There were maybe 45 people there, and he just fills the room and sounds powerful and sounds like a guy who sings for 4 hours a day for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
Just has one of those iconic, beautiful voices, and their interplay is very cool because George sings and plays, and Jim plays the drum stuff, and it's kind of experimental. It's kind of like strange. He just uses interesting ways of playing the drum at the time, and then he does some more traditional beats, but it is kind of a free-flowing, eclectic, like experimental, improvisational thing. And they did play some cuts that I recognize off this newest album that were a lot like this new album they've released, kind of songscapey and just kind of background isn't the right word, but soundtrack type music.
Sure.
But I thought it was excellent. I thought the dynamics were outstanding. There were times that they were playing the songs that were so quiet that it's like he was bowing a lira, and it's like he was playing as quietly as you could bow while still hearing a note come out. It was like a magical night of like beautiful music.
Yeah, and Jim White too. Very expressive sort of drummer. When he plays, he does these things where he'll like bring his hand up like this, and he'll come down and he'll hit like the snare drum or something like that. So the visual elements also there. It's very beautiful and very sort of, there's this
intense,
great flow of everything. Yeah, and then when they get intense and they get sort of heavy, and all that. But like Jeff said, I mean, they brought it down to a whisper at times too, and just incredible, man. I highly recommend checking out any of their footage. You can find it on YouTube. Great Instagram follow as well. And it
was nice to catch up with them and talk to them afterwards. Mike got to talk to George about playing the lauto, and we both talked to both of them, and they were very receptive and very interested in the fact that we're playing that kind of music here in the States. And very cool. Yeah,
they're great, man. And it's that thing where it was such a great moment. Because, they say don't meet your idols type thing, and he, George Xylouris is one of mine for sure as a musician and a lauto player, and just such a kind person and very warm and friendly and inviting. Same thing with Jim White, like Jeff was saying. So, just great dudes, and I look forward to seeing them when they come around again.
Yeah.
So let's talk about
the new album.
The
Forest in Me, which you have told me is a soundtrack to a film. I have not seen this film.
Yes.
I don't even know if this film is completed.
Oh, really?
Based on the research I did.
Oh, okay. So
I don't know.
This album, I did not go to the show and experience it. This musician I've heard in Mike's car in my life, and I'm like, oh, this is Michael's Greek music, and I kind of just leave it at that. But being forced to interact with it on a receptive nature and try to tell somebody how I feel about it. I listened to this. I found it interesting. It was definitely on the avant-garde bend. If you are like judging this on a front and you don't know what kind of music this is, I would categorize it as being avant-garde, soundscape, as you've said, at times sound bathy like, and it's done like you said with Cretan instruments. From the outside, I like this. This is for me a morning record. If you're into avant-garde too, or not into avant-garde kind of music, this album feels like a good entry point to me. It's not like screaming and wailing the whole time. It's not like aggressive noise and kind of that thing. There are some aggressive noises on here, but they're more surrounded by other spaces and airs to make you kind of feel things. And it's quite a gentle avant-garde record, and one that I feel evokes forest and nature and life and living in this kind of way that is in with nature. For me, I'm just going to highlight my favorite track on here, Nightclub, which
my favorite song too.
Which evoked like
they played that live.
This is what I love about this song. So it takes Nightclub. You have nightclub music. The song is called Nightclub, and you instantly in your head you go, I know what nightclub music is. You put this on, and it's literally avant-garde music that is trying to like naturally sound like if trees made nightclub music. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sure.
Does that make sense? They're trying to like naturalize what nightclub music would be in nature.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
Like if the trees were having like a nightclub party. I know this sounds crazy, but like
Because it's like brush drums.
but that's like the vibe of
Yeah.
this record. It's natural, it's nature.
It breathes. The whole thing is just like this breathing.
And that's
thing.
what I got out of it. And
Yeah.
so like for me, having like an outsider view, it was good to like experience that. It was like, oh, this is nice. It would be like nice for like it would pair well with like a nice morning yoga in nature or something like that, right? A nice meditative kind of
Yeah. Yeah, and this album for them, this is their 5th studio album. It's a cool 30 minutes, I think in 32 seconds or something like that. So it's just over 30 minutes long. Super, super digestible. You blink and it's over. There are songs that are a minute and a half. I think the longest track on there is maybe just over 5 minutes long, like 5-ish, something like that. And it is a step away from the other records, where the other records, it's Goats, Black Peak, Mother, The Sisypheans. Those records are much more sort of like what you might consider contemporary Cretan folk music through the lens of like George Xylouris and Jim White, where this is, like we said before, it was made to be a soundtrack for the film The Forest in Me. There's a really, really great podcast called Creative Control with K's with Vish Khanna, and he has Jim White, George Xylouris, and Guy Picciotto, I think is his name, from Fugazi, who was also the producer. And this album was really mainly written during the pandemic, with Guy being in New York, George Xylouris being in Crete, and Jim White being in Australia. And they basically just exchanged emails back and forth. And it was Guy was, during the interview, it was interesting because he was talking about how, like, normally they would record an album, they'd all be in a room together. They didn't have the room to be in together, so they had a copy of the Forest in Me film, and the film kind of became the room that they were all in together. Like, they would all watch it, and then they would all like have different versions or ideas like for each sort of scene and stuff like that, and then they would kind of like send it back and forth and kind of do this sort of collaborative thing. I do believe there are some tracks with them in the room together, but they are very, very few, as I understand it. So, I mean, there's some cool tunes on here. My favorite track on this album is Seeing the Everyday.
That was another one I really enjoyed.
I like this track, too, because when I first listened to this album, I was driving in the car, and I was going to the store, and it had just sort of... It was kind of like a foggy day, and it just sort of started like misty raining, and this song was playing, and I'm like, man, this is such a great song just to kind of like take in sort of like the everyday sort of thing. And then I look at the title and it said Seeing the Everyday. So if I can give one sort of thing about this record that I think is really true, is for most of these songs on this record, the song sounds like what the title is. In a very interesting, very, very interesting way,
Well, yeah, it's kind of like the well, the musical styling of what you feel like Missing Heart would sound like, and it's just done
Right.
in its own like natural kind of way.
Yeah.
Jeff, what did you like on here? That's what I'm really curious.
Well, I want to start with saying I don't want to say these aren't songs because maybe that diminishes what they are, but they are more like instrumental interludes.
Yeah.
This is very much soundtrack music, so it is pretty sparse. It is like the drums. There's only out of the 12 tracks, maybe 5 have an actual consistent like a drum beat and not just like scattery, spacious tom fills or like tambourine taps and like some muted like scrapes and stuff. Even the lauto playing or the lira playing, a lot of times it kind of is free flowing and it's drony or scalar and there's not much of a melody. It's more of a meditation and a mood. The one song I think I like the most because it is the most traditional of a song. I think it is the song that's about 5 minutes is the one you said, Red Wine. Red Wine. Did you mention that song?
I didn't mention that one,
so
but that was
they
one of
played
the
that
singles
live.
too. Yeah.
Yep. And that's one where it actually has like some big strums on the lauto, with an excellent outro that has like these 16th note hi-hats. And I liked some of the flavor on this album. I liked the lira that like you could tell sometimes there were multiple liras that were like droning over each other and one was like playing a scale. There was some like chimey type of accents on what song was that? On Tales of Time. I don't know what it was, but it sounded like some kind of chimey bell thing. The last song, Long Doll, the first half sounded like almost like microtonal, like the melody that like grandfather clocks play, like
right.
overlapping each other. And then the second half, I don't know what instrument that was, but it sounded like a choir of like higher pitched like banjos, kind of like.
I think that was
I
like
don't know what that was.
mandolins.
Okay.
I think it was like dueling mandolins. Yeah,
Yeah.
because in that interview, George talks about how he would receive these sort of ideas from Jim White and stuff, and how excited he was to get those because he was in his own home studio and he just has an array of different sorts of instruments. So.
Yep.
Yeah, it could be mandolin. It could just
I
be
don't
something completely different. I'm not entirely sure. But
I thought you were going to mention the song "Memories and Souvenirs," which is like pretty
Oh,
foreboding.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it went to one of your go-tos, which is playing a thing and detuning the peg as you play the string.
So this is why he's the man, though. I love George Xylouris.
But yeah,
man. He's so
I
good.
think some highlights. Seeing the Everyday was beautiful. Lots of reverb, lots of harmonics on whatever was being played on the lute. Nightclub with the shuffly beat and. Again, more of the heavy, like heavenly harmonic things singing out. I thought this was very cool. I'm gonna give it like one demerit because there's only like 20 seconds where there's any vocals, and it's the Forest in Me, and George like barely hums along for 20 seconds of this like minute and a half long song, and he's such a great singer that I was like. Kind of a little slightly bummed out that this was like a instrumental soundtrack,
Right.
Because I was expecting new album. Oh, good! I love how this guy sings, and it's like
No singing.
no singing. At
I
all.
know. I was a bit bummed
But-
out about that too. Yeah.
But it's cool that we saw live. Like we saw this live, and they would talk to each other and be like, say the title of the song, and then they'd go into what we're all stood there and enjoyed. But we're like, this is like a 2.5 minute exploration.
Yeah.
But that's what this is all full of.
Oh yeah. And they were like talking to each other while the songs were
Yeah.
being played. Jim's like, "All right, do that part." He's like, "Okay," and then they would go into it like mid song. It was the coolest thing, man.
But I think
was so
very
cool.
interesting, very good. Just throw it on early morning, like Luke said.
Yeah.
On your drive to work.
That's my time for way out there stuff in the morning. Don't put this on at night for me. This is like a wake up of the day, have a fresh mind, see the world in a new
And this
light.
is atmospheric out there, not like noisy. This is nothing about this is going to make you, other than a couple of the microtony type of notes. Nothing's going to make you be like, oh, what is this?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
anything on here is done for like effect, and it's not like done to like affect you over the head. Like
Very
Yeah.
primitive, very interesting.
yes,
Yeah, and there's a lot of trust there. I think you can hear that, especially seeing them live. You can just tell like they're on a wavelength together, and I think it really comes through on this record.
Wanna
So
give it some ratings.
yeah,
I'll hit it. I'll
Hit
go.
it up.
This is I'm just giving it a point or a half a point off because there's no vocals, but I think this is a very strong 8. This is very cool. I enjoyed this half hour.
yeah. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go 8.5. I'll dock it the half point to be a 9 for the same reason, because there's no vocals, and I just missed it so much
Yeah.
because like I said, I love his voice so much. But all of their albums are just incredible. They're great. I think what he's doing for or what they're doing for Cretan music in a contemporary conversation is just fantastic. So 8.5.
It feels hard for me to rate a like avant-garde album of this nature because it feels so like personal to the person.
Sure, yeah.
But like, so I'm gonna round out like a 8. I think this is like of the avant-garde. Actually, I'm gonna go like 8.5 because of the avant-garde stuff I've listened to, this is incredibly listenable. Really like natural kind of sounding stuff. I really vibed with it. So yeah, I'm gonna go 8.5. This is a great release, really strong. And as I said, if you're not really into this kind of style of music, this is a great jumping off point.
Yeah.
So please check it out.
Check it out. All right, let's take a quick break.
And then we are going to come back with the Metallica showdown. We're going to rank every album. Stay tuned.
We'll be right back.
72 seasons.
Yeah.
Hey.
And that's why reload's better than load.
Oh, your mistake.